most important resource in Albion Online is silver, and how you choose to make it determines pretty much everything you do in this game. Solo dungeons have long been an enigma to the community, with people having wildly different opinions on whether they are or aren't worth doing. So I bought 1,000 maps for 15.5 mil in the pursuit of finding out a more precise value that each map represents. So far, I have completed 50 dungeons after one session of grinding, and I want to talk a little bit about how this experiment works. You will be seeing every chest I open and any notable loot found from mob drops, and be receiving update videos after every 50 dungeons. Now, I actually know quite a lot about solo dungeons, as they've been my main money making source since I joined the game. I actually already know the approximate values of every map type worth doing, but seeing is believing, so. I've seen two different opinions from popular creators about solo dungeons after their makeover in the Wild Blood update, with Mogdone stating that they were buffed and Swole Benji swearing they were nerfed. Both of these statements are wrong. And no shade towards Mogdone, I know his style of content is very short form when it comes to YouTube, and he doesn't have the time to slot 1,000 solo dungeons into his schedule. For this experiment, I'm using T8 flat maps in the black zone because they're the most accessible maps worth doing, as they're cheap and always pay for themselves in at least raw silver. The main reason for doing this video, however, is because I see creator after creator with titles like 700% profit or 5x investment cost, and my spreadsheet starts crying because of how off these people's results are due to low sample size. So, talking about invaders, I will not be counting any of the loot from killing the invader, but if I get forced out of the dungeon, it will still count, since that kind of stuff can happen to anyone and should be used in our profit calculations. Personally, I do recommend going into dungeons with a set that can fight, since most divers are horrible and they're just free money. So preferably, you just want to force invaders out of your dungeon, most profitably send them upwards to have a chat with Tupac and Jesus. So far, we've only had one diver. It was a 4.3 light crossbow user, and they got rinsed. So we're not going to be using that in our profit calculations, but so far it's only been 1 out of 50 dungeons. Another factor people might ask about is repair costs. Now, I haven't gone down a single time. These are tier 8 flat maps, they're relatively easy, but in general, if you're going down to solo dungeon PvE, you should probably be more focused on getting your Parkinson's prescriptions instead of grinding solo dungeons. So the essence of solo dungeons is that they're a lot like gambling. They kind of just are gambling. So you're putting an investment in and expecting a return, and you always will get some return, but you're not quite sure how much it'll be. So this entire experiment is a lot about just finding what the effective cost of the map should be. How much is it actually worth? So using tier 8 flat maps, they only really go for 15.5k ish, but that's on the high end even. And out of each of these, you're going to be picking that up off of the ground, so it just seemed like a pretty safe investment to make. But I do know that there are better maps to do out there. There are 8.1 maps, 8.2 maps. Some people would even debate 8.3, but I think to actually get into the profit on 8.3 maps, you would need to be investing an insane amount of silver. So you would probably need to be a multi-billionaire to really see 8.3 give value more than what you paid for it at the moment. But we will do 8.3 at some point. The other map type that is like just disgustingly worth it is 7.2 maps. And that might be the next one I do. I will be doing all map types, 1,000 of them each, and be sharing the data with all of you. So stick around for all of that. And when I say all map types, I don't literally mean every map. I'm not going to be doing tier 4 maps, tier 5 maps, that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the maps that are actually like money printers. And usually that is only within the tier 8. And the reason that tier 8 maps are so much more profitable than the other map types is not because of like the item tiers that you get from chests, but it's actually because of purple book chests. Because in the lower tiers, purple book chests will still give you just the tier 1 books, while you'll get the tier 4 books from the purple book chest in tier 8 dungeons. And that increases your profit margins a lot. Like, it's a very, very, very integral integer in our calculations here. Purple book chests are major money printers, especially in tier 8 flat maps, as they're just like 10xing your map cost every time you find them. If you just find one book on the ground for these maps, you're paying for it at the current economic rate. So there's just like almost a zero downside to doing these tier 8 flat maps. I would highly recommend it if you need silver, but just make sure to do them in the black zone. One thing people tend to get really confused on is that the loot bonus affects not like the quality of loot that you get for the most part. It really affects the rate at which mobs drop things. So if you do an 8.1 dungeon, the amount of mob drops you'll get is significantly higher, and a lot of times they're dropping books. I mean, a better majority of the time they're dropping tier 4 runes, but a good amount of time they are dropping books. The loot bonus is also responsible for the amount of silver you pick up off the ground. This is why, if you've ever seen someone do hardcore expeditions or done them yourselves, there's just an insane amount of silver on the ground. It's because the loot bonus is very, very high. So doing these out in the black zone is where you will get the results that I'm getting right now. If you were to do them in like the red zone, it would just be significantly less. Even if you're faction flagged, it's less. So you're going to want to do them in the black zone. The other thing loot bonus affects is the amount of items in a chest. And I'm not talking about like runes or trinkets. I'm just talking about actual items like weapons and armor. Uh, you're going to obviously be wanting to get the most of these as possible, as these are worth more than pretty much anything else you can get in a dungeon. Now, something that loot bonus doesn't affect is actually the chest count or chest rarities that you get. Having a higher loot bonus will not affect how many chests you have, or if they're purple or gold or anything like that. And this is going to be the biggest determining factor in how much silver you make doing solo dungeons. Getting a 2 chest dungeon is going to be a lot more profitable than getting a 1 chest dungeon, obviously. And getting a 3 or 4 chest dungeon is kind of like hitting the jackpot, because you have probably just made at least 10x, 15x your map cost, and if you got very lucky, you may have even 100x your map cost. Think of every chest as like a pull at a slot machine, and just trying to take as many chances as you can get to get a jackpot. So getting a 1 chest dungeon is fairly common. It happens about 25 to 30% of the time in my regular spreadsheet, and low variance can amplify that up very high. Getting 3 chests is actually significantly rarer, looking around 10%, 15%, somewhere in there. And low variance again can make this dreadful, so you can be moving at a slog. At the time of recording, after 50 dungeons, we have gotten 110 chests, which is actually high variance. So right now we have good variance. That's going to show in how much we've actually made. I've been very surprised where we're at right now, which you'll see at the end of all of this. Something that you may have noticed in the background footage is that I carry on me a transport set or an escape set, whatever you want to call it. I recommend that everybody does this. Bring whatever you're comfortable running away in. I would definitely suggest swords, though, with the minor work boots. That will get you back into town pretty much every time. You should be doing dungeons around either a rest or out of the portal town. and be making sure to take invis on the way out. It's just the easiest way to be able to go back and forth, because chaining dungeons can lead to you running into a group of gankers, and that's always a bad time if you're carrying loot on you from like 2 other dungeons and you have whatever clearing set you have. As you can see, I have a 5.4 Blood Moon staff and 6.3 gear all around. So I'm kind of just like I'm a big fish right now. I'm a juicer. And I really like juicing up for solo dungeons. It makes the experience much better. I'm averaging under 10 minutes per dungeon right now, which is very fast. And we're not calculating, profit by the hour, but I have to do 1,000 dungeons, so I'd rather do them as quickly as I possibly can. Now, this being my first ever YouTube video, I realize that this won't reach a lot of people. However, if you've made it this far into the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like, and if you want to see the results of this challenge, please subscribe, that way you'll be notified when all that stuff goes live. The plans for this channel are to cover all things PvE. I have experience running group dungeons, running Avas, very limited with Ava dungeons, but I have experience in almost all of the PvE activities. I've done hardcores, I've done Avalonian portal chests, all of that stuff. So over time, I'm planning on making videos on doing mass amounts of these activities and providing very useful data. That way you can understand what's the actual most profitable or what your expected return is on doing these activities. All of the activities I'm going to be covering on the channel are going to be in lethal zones. And the reason for that is oftentimes people get a little too big for their britches and don't understand how to deal with risk management or bankroll management. And honestly, I think that people, if they had a better reference point for how much money they will be making over time, then they would be able to understand how much they should be risking at any given time. I think far too often a solo player enters the black zone for the first time, goes out and just gets killed, and then thinks, oh, fuck this, I'm just gonna go back to the Royal Continent. I just wish that more solo players would see the black zone for what it really is. It's all just gambling. The entire thing is just a big old gamble. So if you understand your odds well enough within reason, you can just use logic to figure out how often you're going to end up dying doing these things. And then you understand how much you stand to gain. You can actually do math to see if it's even worth it to try. I also realized that some players that may find this video are new and just joining on Europe. Now, the stats that you're going to be getting shown aren't going to be exact, as your market's going to be very volatile, especially in the beginning. If you give it about a month or two to kind of iron itself out, this will be relatively the same. The exact amount of silver will be different, but you'll be getting pretty much the same profits. Just adjust it for our inflation. Albion's dev team for a long time has been neglecting solo players. They added tracking, but obviously that turned out pretty poorly, even with the new quarries. It's just not really all that good, and it's way too risky for most people to feel comfortable doing it. Even if they're making a profit, it doesn't feel good to just be dying all of the time. So a lot of people don't really know what to do as a solo player. Obviously, if you want to PvP, the myths and corrupted dungeons are there, but if you're just trying to make money, a lot of people are turning to either gathering or something like crafting and that kind of stuff to generate profit, which I highly suggest. Both of those are very good ways to make money. But when it comes to more active gains, as opposed to crafting, where it's a bit more passive and you run out of focus and need to do something else to make a little bit of money, I really do think solo dungeons are going to be giving you a lot more money in general. And I think they outclass gathering on most levels. It depends on how much spec you have into gathering. Gathering is a lot more of a long-term investment, where doing solo dungeons is just instant profit. You don't have to wait for your skills to go up or anything like that. And if you want to get a head start on some people, if this ends up becoming something people reference, certain map prices may go up. If you want to get a head start on that and actually invest into solo dungeon maps, the ones to look out for will be the tier 8 flat maps. They are severely underpriced right now, and the 7.2 maps are also incredibly underpriced. So if you want to pick them up now to run them later or even just resell them later, it might be a good idea. I can't guarantee anything about resale value, but to run them, they are both very, very much in the money at the moment. I know you haven't seen any of the data quite yet, but you'll see the profits I've made off the tier 8 flats in just a little bit. And if you want to take my word for it, 7.2s are genuinely the most profitable map in the entire game. And you may be thinking, oh, you're contradicting yourself because you said you need the purple book chest. I don't know what it is about 7.2s, but I know it isn't just high variance because I have done almost 1,000 of them. And from my stats, they are the most profitable in the entire game. I don't know what it is about them. I think it has something to do with just more items being in the loot pool because tier 5 items are more common to sell on the black market, which next episode we'll get into a lot more about the black market and how it works and the better times to do dungeons, because the time of day that you actually do your solo dungeons has a really big effect on how much money you make from them, believe it or not. And as we're wrapping this first episode up, if you have a guess to how much we made off these 50 dungeons, just throw it in the comments right now. You will be very surprised, I know I was, on how much we made off just 50 of these flat 8s. Um, it's genuinely the highest variance I think I've ever caught in doing big batches of solo dungeons, like ever. So after 50 solo dungeons, we are currently sitting at 13.5 mil in looted items and 1.3 mil of looted silver off the ground, putting us at 14.8 million, almost paying off the 1,000 maps already. And scrolling through, you can see we actually hit some pretty decent items, mainly high tier bags, a couple of maps as well. If you have any kind of other questions or topics you want covered for the next episode, please let me know. This has been some of the best variants I've ever seen. It's been actually really fun grinding these out, and we'll see if it continues in the next one.